Hello, class. This is Dr. Bradley Wolf, and I'm going over Chapter 7 and Beyond the Podium. We're going to learn about supporting your ideas in public speaking. So I'll share my screen here, and we'll just guide you through the textbook here. So those are the learning objectives. So we go here, just what is supporting material, first of all? Support refers to the material you use to develop and strengthen your speech. So often this would be facts and statistics, definitions, narratives, testimony, analogies, and how you choose to deliver it. So it serves three crucial functions. So it clarifies complex ideas, it enhances your credibility, and it makes your speech more compelling to your specific audience. So you should have your audience in mind when you're looking for supporting material. And I always remind my students, make sure you're citing your sources because that's going to enhance the credibility, showing that you have good, strong sources. Making sure it's a research cited information, so it's credible, it's authentic, it's strategically selected as well for you to think about. And whether you're speaking in a classroom or whether you're even in a conversation with someone else, you want to make sure you're using good information and not, there's a lot out there about fake news, right? We want to make sure we're fact checking our sources. We're looking through multiple perspectives. We're not just finding the first thing we find and, oh, that must be right. Sometimes students do that. They when you're just trying to get done quickly, you're rushed on time. I get it. It's happened. I've been a student for a very long time. But the first thing you find is not necessarily going to be the most credible piece of information. It's not necessarily even going to be accurate. Sometimes you just find what you're looking for, right? There's all those algorithm biases. If we look at AI, if we look at even Google and your search history and social media, there's the algorithm biases, which is going to show you the same information or similar information or from a similar perspective. So you're going to have to be very thoughtful and intentional to search out different viewpoints and for strong sources that's going to be credible to your specific audience. So here it says why we use supporting material. So it clarifies content, adds credibility, and it adds some vividness to your presentation as well. So when we think about an argument, your claim, it's a statement that you want to prove and you want the audience to accept. So it could be a broad thesis or it could be a subpoint. So it could be the main idea for your speech, or it could be just a section header where you have a claim that you're trying to prove with information that you've researched. So supporting material provides that support, right? It provides that evidence to support your claim. The evidence supports the claims. To clarify content, so sometimes you need specific supporting material to help your audience understand what you're talking about. So if you're giving a speech on cyberbullying, you might need to define the term. What is cyberbullying? Sometimes, especially in like competitive speeches, it's defining the terms is very important because people can have different definitions that they're relying on. So what definition are you relying on for your speech? So those defining key terms can be important. Also, if your speech contains a lot of jargon, so very industry-specific information, if you're giving a speech on agriculture and there's some agriculture terms that your audience may not be familiar with, you're going to want to be sure to define them or avoid using that jargon in your presentation as well. That's another way of going about it. But definitely it can help clarify content and your perception and your approach to a specific issue. The second point, as I've said before, it adds credibility. So it shows that you've done research, that you're using credible sources, you have good statistics, and it's grounded in solid evidence instead of just your personal opinion. If you're using questionable sources or twisting evidence, it can damage your credibility. So again, you want to be very thoughtful about it. And the last point here, it adds some vividness to your presentation, so it makes the speech more memorable. If we go back to like ancient Greece and Plato would always say it's that emotional appeal that really brings the audience in and can swing the day, right? It can change their opinions. So a lot of times we want the logic, we want the evidence, we want it to be credible, but that emotional appeal, the pathos, is also very important. Because it can tell a story. So you finding some good anecdotes, some good stories to tell to bring the picture to life and put it in human terms can be very helpful. There's also powerful statistics you could do, other sorts of creative examples, but that storytelling piece can be very powerful. And if you have a short speech, like, for my public speaking class, the speeches are usually 4 to 6 minutes at most. you're not going to have a lot of time to tell stories, but you're going to want to try and find some way to put that in there. Sometimes I recommend students start with a story at the beginning, then have the evidence throughout the speech and end with a story again. So bring it back to the same story and see how the evidence brings everything together. There's different ways of doing it, though. That the story could also be a supporting point, but otherwise, it's adding vividness. If you're just shouting numbers at the audience, you're probably not shouting. That's not the best way to to approach a speech. But also, you don't just want to say numbers and throw a bunch of statistics at them, right? You want a variety of evidence. So you like some data is good, some quantitative evidence is good, and balance that with the qualitative evidence. So that brings us to the next point about types of supporting materials. So first are facts and statistics. So facts are verifiable observations, experience, or events that can be proven true, which is different than an opinion. Statistics represents the numerical data about what's been collected, analyzed, and interpreted in order to reveal patterns or trends. So that's really about the numbers. Then there's an activity here. I recommend you do this activity about AI hallucinations. So AI can produce statistics that sound impressive, but they're not accurate. So tools like ChatGPT and Copilot will sometimes just make things up, right? And that's one of the problems with AI is they do hallucinate. They're trying to get you the best information. And if they can't find it themselves, they're just going to produce something that they think sounds good based on what they found. So you want to make sure you're using actual sources and not just AI. Or even if you ask AI to give you a source, sometimes it will just make up a source, right? They'll give you a nice citation, but it's not accurate. It's not even a thing. Like they'll just hallucinate a source, which can be very difficult, but very easy to spot to see if you're using AI in unethical ways by just trying to, have it create something for you because it does have issues. If you're asking it for sources or statistics, it definitely can hallucinate. So go ahead and test through that activity and try it out, and you'll be able to see. So here's some good sources: the U.S. Census Bureau, National Health Statistics, Center for Public Opinion, Nielsen, Gallup, Pew Research Center. I've given some professional presentations to communities of rural Minnesota about changing demographic data, how their communities are changing, and I use a lot from the Pew Research Center there. That's a really great source. We've talked about definitions earlier, so definitions ensure you and your audience are speaking the same language. It can mean something, a term may have more than one meaning, as I've talked about before. So I already mentioned jargon a little bit, specialized or technical term used within a particular field or community. Lexical is how a word is used in everyday language. Again, there's different ways to define it. It talks about freedom. There is examples, different ways of using freedom in different contexts. Persuasive, when you frame a term to influence how your audience perceives it. So calling someone a freedom fighter versus calling them a terrorist is going to shape your perception of the person. So using the language that you can use really paints a picture for the audience. There's this stipulative, so that define the term you want it. Oh no. I know. Jumped ahead on me. Let me go back to my spot. Where was I? Here we go. So stipulative. So for this speech, I want to define success not as wealth or fame, but as waking up excited about your day. So being able to define a term within the context of your speech and your argument can be important in framing the issue. And then theoretical as well. You can explain complex concepts by identifying their essential characteristics. So again, you could have a neutral tone, a more urgent tone, or a dismissive tone, depending on how you want to approach it. And I give some examples there. Some more, the next one's examples. So type of evidence. Examples are a type of evidence. You can use a positive example about why we must advance technology in developing countries. So again, this is a specific case study that really brings the issue to life. So you can read through that if you're interested. A negative example, why public speakers should not rely on technology. So again, bringing example, the story brings it to life a little bit. Even in a few sentences, they're able to bring these to life. So again, when you're reading through the textbook, you can check these out or just pause it right now, pause my video and read them yourself. They're good examples. Or non-example, explain what something is not. So you're able to have it gives different quotes by giving, hey, does this sound right or does this sound right? So allowing the audience to compare the examples themselves. Or the best example, it illustrates the ideal approach under a specific set of circumstances. So again, telling a story with an example, talking about why we should move toward a plant-based diet in an ideal world, right? And what you may understand, especially with more of a persuasive speech, is your audience may come up short. If your persuasive speech is, hey, you should have a plant-based diet. If it's all or nothing, the audience is like, yeah, that's a pretty big step. But you can think of smaller steps. Hey, maybe one meal a week. You can commit to being plant-based. So again, think about that. Meatless Mondays was a movement for a while. So what is a small step that the audience can take in your larger picture, whatever your issue might be, whether it's persuasive or just the informative speech? What little piece of information do you want them to take away? You gave them a speech of information. What is the one takeaway that you want them to have? Then narrative. So again, people love stories. That includes the audience, and there's different types of narratives. So there can be an attention-getting story is going to have the primacy effect to be able to create that sentiment in your audience's memory before they get to the core of the speech. And the recency effect is telling a story at your end helps seal the deal. And again, if you use them for both, use the same story for both, it wraps it like a present, right? It wraps your speech together very nicely with both primacy and the recency, bringing that narrative to life and as kind of a core to the speech you're giving. So again, one strategy, you don't have to use that strategy. Certainly there are others, but it's just an example. So in terms of the types of narratives, there is informative narratives that helps your audience understand something unfamiliar. So if you're giving a speech, tell a story about how it works. So just informing the audience. A persuasive narrative is again to persuade the audience. So it really depends on what type of speech you're going to have, is what type of narrative you're going to use. But persuasive, you're trying to change their mind, get them to take action. So you might share a story of someone that was harmed. For this example, it says through deepfake video, someone who's harmed by a deepfake video. Could be an example of a narrative that makes the consequences real. So instead of figurative, it makes it very real and concrete. And entertaining narratives, a lot of comedians might tell stories to bring it to life. You may tell a story at a wedding toast to make a joke about the bride or the groom. Tell a funny story, a memory that you may have of them. So again, a lot of different ways of doing narratives. Then here it's encouraging you to watch a TED Talk called Talk Nerdy to Me with communication coach Melissa Marshall to tell a story about her transformation from fear to fascination when teaching engineering students. So it's another example. So if you're looking for more examples of, and you want to see how this works in context, this is a speech that uses a narrative example that can be helpful. Then there's testimony as evidence. You can use testimony from an expert. So again, you may not be an expert on your issue, but you can find an expert and you can quote the expert to find good information, some testimonies supporting a topic. So then when you're citing the source, you may also want to cite, why is this person credible? Not just say, hey, this was Bradley Wolf said this. Well, why is Bradley Wolf an expert on that? Who is that person? I don't even know him, right? Whatever it may be, you're going to want to say, why is that person an expert? It builds their credibility, and it also builds your credibility by supporting the testimony in the audience's eyes. So again, here's a reading fact check, another activity. I love this textbook. It's embedded with activities. Not as good for a video lecture going through it, but I recommend you go in here and go through this activity. So you'll be able to scan, you'll be able to check the sources and make sure it's accurate. Is it accurate? Or what issues there may be with it? So again, it gives you a variety of choices for maybe some different red flags it may have. So in the activity, it talks about misinformation, disinformation, and AI hallucination. So misinformation is false or misleading information that's spread without the intent to deceive. Just you're incorrect. Oh, shoot, I have my facts wrong. Disinformation is written by a real person or crafted using AI on purpose to deceive or manipulate people. That's the difference. So disinformation is intentional misinformation. And then AI hallucination is just making up stuff as it goes. It's generated by a tool. It's not on purpose, but the AI is just filling the gaps in what it knows. Then expert testimony. There's different types of testimony that could be given. Expert testimony, again, you're going to say why the person's an expert. Then there's eyewitness testimonies, someone who has direct personal contact with the phenomenon or the event related to your speech topic. So this may just be a story to help bring it to life. They don't need to be, some grand expert with a PhD or, the head of the, International Health Bureau or whatever it may be. It may just be a single person, a story that you found online that just tells the story of why the topic's important to them and how it fits within their life. We're just getting through section 1 here. This is a longer section, a longer chapter. I need to breathe. So then we have analogies. So analogies come next. A lot of information, a lot of terms here. So you may want to go back and read through this as well, because I feel like I'm just throwing terms out at you, which again is not the best type of speech, but it's a very dense chapter with a lot of information. So I'm trying to go through these the best I can to give you the gist of what you need to know. Um, hopefully you can latch onto these terms based on what you already know about them, and maybe you'll see them again in the future in another course or in another way. So then there's analogies. So comparing something unfamiliar, explaining something unfamiliar by comparing it to something your audience already knows. This can be literal analogies or figurative analogies. So literal analogies compare two things from the same category. You might compare two schools, two public policies, or two technologies that work in a similar way. Whereas a figurative analogy, you're comparing things from different categories. So regulating AI is like building a dam in a hurricane. It's not a literal comparison, but it paints a strong mental picture for the audience. Um, so then it's saying how you can use AI to help create analogies. So again, another activity for you to do in a positive way of using AI. This section so far has talked about some negative issues with AI hallucinations. But here's an activity you can do to help you brainstorm. All right, that's section 7.1. I'll go to 7.2 here. Using support and building arguments. So first of all, you're going to find when you're doing research for a speech, you can find a lot of information. There's tons of information online. You can find facts, definitions, examples, narratives, testimony, analogies, all sorts of information. Again, you want a good balance of information. You don't want to be using the same sort of material again and again in your speech. So it's good to have some balance. But here's some methods you can go through to fact check your information and make sure you're finding quality sources, because that's what's most important. Regardless of what type of source it is, it needs to be quality. So first is lateral reading. So when doing research online, you can do some lateral reading by evaluating online information, by leaving the original source to investigate what others say about it. So instead of relying on one website to judge its credibility, open additional tabs to find the source's background, reputation, and reliability. So again, finding multiple sources with the same information. This can be very helpful if you're looking at fact-checking sites or looking at different perspectives on the issue. Sometimes I'll find more of a liberal news source and a conservative news source and compare how they paint the picture. What do they have in common? And also, what do they do differently? I think that's very helpful. But one of the problems with the internet is sometimes they're just citing each other, right? So they're just doing the same information in a circle, and it's not actually different sources, really. Sometimes it'll be the same article on multiple websites. So again, just making sure you're critically engaging with the information. And that's why it's good to have some other strategies as well. So next is the SIFT method. So when you encounter information online, you can tell whether it's a shocking statistic, an expert quote, or breaking news. Don't always just accept it at face value. So the SIFT method, step one, is stop. Before you read or share anything, pause. Do I recognize this source? Do I know the website author? Is it something that I trust? Is it something that other people would trust? Sometimes people, again, get in these bubbles online of having, very fringe ideas being seen as expert sources even when they're not. So again, is this a reputable source that my audience, whoever my audience is going to agree with? So just first stop. Two, the I, investigate the source. So open a new browser tab and search for the author or organization, and don't rely on what sources say about themselves, or do others see them as a credible source of information. Number three, F, find better coverage. So don't always stick with the first source that you find. Look for the same topic on another source as well. Again, if you're finding multiple news sources saying the same thing, it's more likely that it's accurate. It's not 100% sure it's accurate. But again, we're just trying to improve the credibility of the sources and improve your credibility as a speaker. Then number four, trace claims back to their origin, follow information back to its original source. If an article mentions a study, go find the study. I remember once my daughter was showing me a TikTok video and she's like, oh no, it's true. It's on TikTok. And I'm like, okay, it might be true, right? I don't know that it is true or not true, but why do you think it's true? And she's like, oh, the video, they said they did the research. And I'm like, okay, let's show me the video and do the research. And she shows me the video and the TikToker just said, I did my research and this is what I found. And like, where's your research from? What are you citing? You're citing nothing. You're just saying you did research. That doesn't tell me anything, right? You can't just say I did research and then, I should trust you. What sources did you use? Let me go back to that original source. So the SIFT method is stop, investigate, find better coverage, and trace claims to their origin. So that can be very very helpful if you have the time. Of course, I know sometimes students are rushing to get things done, but again, this is ideal situation. You're putting in the time and effort to make sure you have credible information and evaluating different sources. So both the lateral reading and the SIF method fact checking are reactive evaluations. So here's what I found. What do I think of it? As you solidify a purpose and conduct research, you may discover the content in front of you on the internet that you've never explored before. So it talks about algorithmic personification. Your online life is known to technology companies, so whether it's Google, whether you're using AI or social media, but once you're searching for more information, you get to see more perspectives. So like me on social media, I make sure I'm following some liberal sources of information, some conservative sources of information. I have some libertarians in there just to get another perspective, and I'm like, okay, do I have good diverse representation of viewpoints in my feed, and is this going to help me get some accurate information? Again, I don't necessarily trust one side or the other, but if they're both talking about the same issue, I look at what do they have in common, kind of what are some of those things in common for me to make sure that I'm getting some good quality information, just to be an educated person, right? In our civil society, it's good to be educated about what's going on in the world, and I try and have good balance. I also have humor and fun things or pictures of cute animals, because reading about civics is not always the most fun and lighthearted activity. So I make sure to balance it with fun things too. So make sure I like gaming as well, so games and whatever else. I make sure to balance out my social media feed with other things that are fun for me as well. But whatever is fun for you, I recommend adding some of that in there as well. So it's important to help with so we talked about reactive evaluation with those methods after you read it, kind of checking to see if it's true. There's also proactive evaluation. Um, to allows you to keep facts and technologies in check, and the quote is, because I understand where this information came from and why I'm seeing it, I can trust this kind of information and for this purpose. Like, why do you trust the information? Why do you trust the source? Why do you trust the information? And why is your audience going to trust the information too? You want to make sure you're thinking about that. So when it's okay, if you're researching your speech for pets that should be adopted from a rescue shelter instead of purchased from a puppy mill, you visited Instagram, YouTube, Google, ChatGPT, and went to 15 websites, and you even had a text exchange with one of your parents' friends who worked at the local shelter. Almost immediately, you start receiving a stream of ads for ASPCA about recent puppy mills in your area. Even ChatGPT seems to remember your interest and continually offering suggestions for pet care and volunteering. So sometimes we'll remember things. Um, when it's not okay, you watch a YouTube video about alternative pet vaccines out of curiosity. Soon your feed is flooded with videos pushing unverified claims about pet health, anti-vet rhetoric, and conspiracy theories about animal shelters. Ads and search results start reinforcing those ideas, making it harder to find trustworthy information. The algorithm, designed to feed you more of what you engage with, creates a bubble of disinformation, which makes it feel like this skewed viewpoint is widely accepted even when it's not. So again, you may have some of that already built into your algorithm that the companies are feeding you. So you're like, this is all over the place. Why haven't you seen it? I've had sometimes my friends come up to me and say, why haven't you seen this? How haven't you seen it? And I'm like, because I follow diverse perspectives and you just follow one point of view. So it's going to pop in your feed a lot faster than mine. And yours may not be accurate information because sometimes you have some disinformation on that feed because it only puts one point of view. So again, it's good to use a variety of perspectives. So this is a charged topic, very much with AI and the internet and technology and everything that's happening. This is a charged topic. So using a variety of support material is next. So again, I've talked about this multiple times. So if your topic is on mental health support on colleges' campuses, you may start with a statistic, add a personal story. You can share your own experiences. Like, why did you pick this topic? Why is it important to you? That's important to make that connection. If it's important to you, that can help connect it to the audience, why it may be important to them as well. Then you may include some expert testimony and have a concrete example as well. And here's another one. You may start with a definition, provide a statistic, include an analogy, and provide a personal example. So again, use a variety of types of sources is very important and helpful. So here's another activity that you can go through, supporting material checklist to strengthen your claim. So it has different types of sources that you can include, and you can go through all of those. That can be very helpful. Again, it's helpful to do those activities. That's why they're included in the text. But I'm not going to go through it in the video. So final supporting material review. So consider your context, know your audience, stay focused, keep it relevant, right? Who are you talking to? What information is important? You're probably going to find more information if you're doing the speech well, right? If you're researching your speech well, you're going to find a lot more information than you can use in the speech. So find what's going to be, again, a good variety of information, using different sources, different quality sources together, have good balanced perspectives. But again, and know what your audience already knows, right? If you're telling them something they already know, it may not be as helpful to them. It may be a good reminder, but it may not be the best use of your limited time. So think about where's my audience's level of knowledge at with this topic, and where can I go from there? So now, forming your speech support. You've gathered, evaluated, and completed a final review of your supporting material. Now comes the exciting part, bringing it to life so your audience trusts you. So 5 common forms of speech support and how to use them effectively. So quotations, direct quotes on other speakers or writers' exact words within your speech. So you may use famous quotes, focus on expertise, having different details. Um, you're trying to keep it short too. So if your entire speech is a quote, it's not your speech, right? So try and keep it as short and to the point. And give some examples here. The examples here is how are you bringing the topic to life? So focus on expertise here. So when Patrick Blanc, who's Patrick Blanc? I don't know who that is. That means nothing to me. But if you say when Patrick Blanc, the botanist and the modern expert on the green wall, explains why vertical gardens could revolutionize cities, if you say it that way, his words are going to carry more weight than yours alone. You could also, um, basically lift up the people you're citing or the sources. Why are they credible? I've had students sometimes, oh, I need to cite my source. I'm going to cite my source. And it tells me nothing about why that's a credible source. It doesn't even sound like a credible source sometimes. So why is this source credible for this topic and for your audience? Keep that in mind when you're citing, especially with direct quotes, but even with paraphrasing, you still should be citing your sources. So paraphrasing is when you're using it in your own words. So sometimes that helps to make it more clear, especially for your topic. It can help simplify. It can freshen it up a little bit, freshen up the information. And it says be prepared to bring some direct quotes for backup. Normally in a structured speech environment, you wouldn't do that. But if there was some question answer session, or if you're giving it like in a meeting and trying to share information, putting in your own words, people may ask, where did you get the information from? Could you share more? And then be prepared to share your resources. So again, public speaking in classroom may or may not happen, but definitely in a work environment it could. Other environments it may or may not, depending if there's that Q&A. Then summary, sometimes you need to paint the big picture before diving into the details. So summaries are a wide-angled lens capturing the entire arguments or movements in digestible forms. So sometimes you can start with the summary of the information before adding in the details later on. So paint the big picture and then add in the details as you're going along. There's also numerical support. So again, that's using the data and the numbers to bring the topic to life. There's visual support. Sometimes this can complement the numerical support. Sometimes numbers are hard to digest on your own, but if you had an infograph or numbers or graph or something to bring it to life, it can be very helpful in helping the audience digest the information and understand your numbers in context. And make sure the numbers and the graph is big enough for the audience to see. I don't know how many times I've sat through a speech where they have a graph on the screen and you can't read the tiny little labels way back there, tiny little labels, and I can't even understand what the graph is, right? It's worthless at that point. So make sure that the audience can see the information and see the graph. And if it's too complex of graph, then don't use it, right? Simplify it. Simplify the information and make it very easily to see and understand in a quick amount of time. Sometimes students have a graph that I can see that's very complex and a lot of information on it. But then I'm sitting there staring at the screen, trying to understand the graph, reading the different data points instead of listening to the speech. So again, think about how much information do I need to show to make my point, and what is this doing? So that's a little bit about numerical and visual support. Visual support can also be images, videos. You don't want your video to be too long. If you're giving a 4 to 6 minute speech, you don't want a 4 minute long video with sound. Sometimes I have said students who use a longer video to put the video on silent and talk while the video is showing and explain what's going on. So then you still get the time to share your opinion and perspective what you're trying to advocate for without letting the video distract from it. But video support can be very helpful, or visual support can be very helpful with if you're doing proper ergonomics, uh, different cultural dance moves. So again, you can have a video, you can do it yourself. I've had some students, you whatever, just use their body as a visual aid as well, or their clothing as a visual aid. That can be very helpful. So there's been big movements. I've seen a lot of presentations adding AI generated art. This is an example of how to create a prompt and describe your image and evaluate the image and have it adjusted. Certainly try it out, right? So again, AI is with us now, right? Whether we like it or not, it's with us. And this guides you through how to create AI generated art and how to make sure it's cited and used appropriately. Da, 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 da. Understanding arguments. So arguments, again, we talked about the claim, is what you're trying to get the statement you're trying to get the audience to accept, and you need evidence to support your claim. So reasoning is how we connect the dots in the argument. So links the support to your claim so that you and your audience can decide whether your evidence does really support it. So the claim is what you're trying to convince the audience of. The support is the evidence for your claim. And then the reasoning is a logical leap that links them together. The argument needs to make. Oh, no, I pressed the wrong button. I haven't. Just looking used to this laptop. The keys are in slightly different spots. So your argument needs to make that mental leap, otherwise referred to as an inference, because it's the explanation, the so what, that makes your message click with your audience. So if your claim is eating fast food has been linked to childhood obesity, your support is childhood obesity is linked to early onset type 2 diabetes, which have many negative health ramifications. Reasoning, therefore, for children to avoid developing early onset type 2 diabetes, they must limit their fast food intakes. So does this support, does the evidence fit with that claim? To me, it needs more information, right? That can be a piece of evidence, but you need more to link that, the fast food specifically, the nutrition it's talking about there too. So again, looking at children's health and the food habits, just saying there are a lot of, children who are obese have type 2 diabetes can have negative health ramifications. That doesn't say much about fast food. So maybe a piece of evidence, but you're going to need more to really back up that claim. So this talks about strong versus weak reasoning. It gives a lot of examples here. So again, you can read through these, but again, thinking about, so again, what's here is having more facts, cited data, expert testimony, good reasoning. Whereas down here, the reasoning is seen as weaker because it's, it's just more opinions and not a lot of specific facts to go along with it, right? The support, I saw a Tesla commercial that looked cool, right? That's not very, doesn't tell us much about why everyone should switch to electric cars. Or down here, soda has more sugar than we realize. How much sugar does it have, right? Give that specific data, give that specific evidence. So you're going to want to, think about the reasoning and the support and information that you're sharing and how it connects to each other. Certainly at Ridgewater College, we have a class specifically about argumentation and reasoning can go a lot more in depth into this stuff. Here, a lot of information in chapter 7 that we're just trying to go through. So what about AI? So again, AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Google Gemini can help you brainstorm ideas and construct your speech. But when you're building arguments, AI is far from perfect. So here are some issues with AI that we've seen when trying to help with it. First is evidence mismatch. So it may bring stuff together that doesn't really fit with it. Again, it's just looking at what's on the web and not necessarily fitting things together. And so it gives an example here of how the evidence didn't really fit with it. You can read through that if you want. But it's finding evidence from something else and then trying to fit it into your argument. That doesn't work so well. There's logical leaps. So you're preparing a speech on mental health here. It's talking about AI jump from correlation to causation, saying that Instagram causes depression. It's correlated with it. And so there's a difference between causation and correlation. So AI may not understand those logical leaps and how to avoid them. It's also repetitive bias. So if you keep asking information about it, does have what we see. So it's talking about there are a lot of tall white men who are CEOs of companies. So it may, if you're looking at leadership styles for a presentation using AI, it may give you factors specific to the what's existed in the past because of biases that people have had and how the opportunities. Again, just being a little bit taller can make you look more like a leader, or the way that somebody is dressed. Again, I don't know why this is true, but again, it's the biases that people have. But the taller you are, the more likely you are to be a CEO. At least that's what's happened in the past. But now that we have had more examples of people who are shorter and leaders, and it's certainly changed over time as well. And they do that in debates too. If you look at political debates, they'll put them on little like pedestals of different heights, so all their height's going to be exactly the same. So you're not going to get that bias because one person's taller than the other. So it's one way they try to make it a little bit more equal. So AI also has some training data that reflects societal stereotypes. So it's not intentionally discriminating, but it's repeating stereotypes that exist in our society and around the world. So it's good, something to be thoughtful about. And then confident confusion, AI doesn't say, I don't know. If you ask it, it's going to confidently explain some steps, and it may be wrong, right? It may be giving you wrong information or maybe a little bit confused about it, but it's not going to say, I don't know, or I wasn't sure. So sometimes even when I try and correct AI, it still doesn't want to fully admit that it's wrong. But it will start to adjust things. Oh, I see what you're saying, right? Try to adjust things. And perfect puzzle pieces. So when you're researching a complex issue, real experts usually acknowledge uncertainty, conflicting evidence, and limitations to their data. But AI is not going to do that. They're not going to, AI doesn't say, oh, this isn't exactly right, or it's going to create a perfect picture. So there are no missing pieces, no rough edges. It's going to give you just a kind of clear opinion on a controversial topic and saying this is the way it is, right? And that's not, there's nuance, right? There's always nuance to different topics that we need to think about. So AI reasons differently than humans do, right? Keep that in mind. Don't have AI write your speech for you. It's not going to turn out too well. So be very careful about that. So again, check AI results, another activity here that you can do, and you can check why it may be, not trustworthy as a source. All right. So it's best to make your reasoning explicit instead of making your audience make those leaps in reasoning. So there's causal reasoning, which one event causes another one. Analogical reasoning draws comparison between similar situations, and sign reasoning uses indicators to point towards a larger conclusion. So causal reasoning, it's a cause because A happened, B will result. So you may use expert testimony or a narrative to help bring it to life. But that's, again, you could read through these examples here, but it's cause and effect relationship. And so that can be the reasoning that you use in your arguments that you make. There's also analogical reasoning. Since X is like Y, what's true for X is true for Y. So it's a comparison of people, places, things, events, or more abstract relationships as well. And here's some more examples of that may be the reasoning. Sign reasoning, A indicates B. So one thing stands for another. So here's the different signs we can look out for that means something else is happening. So it's cloudy out, it may start raining, right? So that's the sign reasoning. One thing represents another. So again, there's classes that go into much more depth of this. I'm trying to get us through this in a reasonable amount of time here. So let's go on to the next one. 7.3, assessing arguments and credibility. So one of the reasons it's good to know all this information in some depth is not just to be able to create a speech for yourself that has very sound, clear arguments. It's also as a listener, as an audience member, you want to be able to assess the arguments and the credibility of what you're listening to, what you're consuming, whether it be online, whether it be in conversations with other people, whether it be you sitting down and listening to a speech or an instructor. If someone's instructing you on something and, hey, that doesn't sound right, you want to be able to pull apart why it could be wrong. So it's important to know this from a listener's perspective as well, but also when you're crafting a speech and trying to assess information to see if it's good or quality. The research and sources you're using, you can also use these as well. So here it says assessing your argument. Honestly, you could assess someone else's argument using the same stuff. But first of all, are you supporting your claims? So you're making a claim. How are you supporting it? How is either you supporting it as a speaker, or how is the speaker supporting it, regardless of who's the speaker? How are they supporting their claims? Next is ethical consideration. So you want to make sure that you're being ethical in the claims you have, that you're using appropriate evidence for those and using ethical evidence, and you're not just ignoring stuff that rejects your claims, because there's a lot of information online. You could just find information that supports your claims and ignore everything else. So there's support manipulation occurs when a speaker goes out of their way to mislead an audience, despite the overwhelming majority of evidence indicating those exact opposite of the desired outcome. So sometimes people will cherry pick their sources or information and say, look, I found one study that says this. Well, the other 100 studies say something different. So you're going to want to make sure to take some time to look into that with a little bit more depth and be more thoughtful. So it talks about evidence selection, evidence quality, logical connection, transparency. So again, you want to be transparent to where you're getting the information. You want to make sure you have good quality sources that you're using, and you're making a logical connection between those sources and the information you found, or your evidence, and the claims that you're making. So you have that appropriate reasoning here. So here's an AI debate, comparing arguments for and against your topic. So AI can sound confident on both sides of the issue, but can argue fairly. So you're going to ask AI to generate if you do this activity, ask AI to generate the strongest argument for and against your speech topic, and you're going to evaluate which sounds more persuasive to you. So that can be helpful as what sort of biases may be in there. And it's just a good activity to note that AI has biases, right? Even though it tries to be neutral or just looking for facts, or, oh, wait, it's a computer. Of course, it doesn't have a bias. Well, there's biases in society, and it's absorbing those biases and how it operates. So asking it to have both sides can be helpful, just to see where it may be coming from or what biases may be built into your algorithm. So avoiding errors in reasoning. So 6 questions you can ask yourself. So first, does your claim follow the support material? So that is, could a careful Google search confirm the connection? So both the claim and supporting material are correct, but there's no reasoning that bridges the gaps. So here's the quote: because our city's population has grown by 15% in the past decade, we should switch to renewable energy sources. What? Those have nothing to do with each other. They could, if you created some reasoning there. Hey, our city's population is growing. With a growing population, we're using more energy. Our energy has increased as well, and that's putting a stronger, harm on the grid, and also creating pollution in the local area. Right? You can add some reasoning in there that would make sense, but just by itself, what's the city's population have to do with renewable energy sources? Right? It doesn't. You want to make those those connections explicit in your speech so the audience can follow along. Sometimes, because you've been doing a ton of research, you're very passionately involved in creating the speech. Some of the stuff may just be obvious to you, but it's not always obvious to your audience. So make sure it's they're able to follow along. Next, does your supporting material simply restate your claim? This is called a circular argument. We should ban cell phones in the classroom because mobile devices shouldn't be allowed during instruction time. That's saying the same thing. We should ban cell phones in the classroom because cell phones should be banned, right? You're not giving a lot of reasoning or evidence to support your claim. So again, think through that. What evidence? Oh, there, could you find evidence about them being a distraction, about cyberbullying even. I've heard people make arguments that, hey, the taxpayers are paying for the education in the K-12 classrooms, so they shouldn't be allowed in there because it's an investment of the community, and the student should be making the most of that investment, right? There's a lot of arguments that could be made, but you don't just say we should ban them because we should ban them, right? That's not saying much. Does your claim even relate to your speech topic? Well, some information is interesting. It could actually be distracting. It's commonly referred to as a red herring, technically ignoring the question and not a good use of anyone's time and energy. Our government should invest in building a public transportation citizen because many citizens in other countries enjoy theirs. What's that have to do with public transportation in our government? And which government are you talking about, right? There could be the city, the county, the state, the federal government. What's different about these communities that makes it helpful for some places and not others, right? I live in rural Minnesota. We're not going to have a tram going from place to place in rural Minnesota. Maybe we'll have a train going through town if it goes from one major hub to another, but there's not going to be a tram that takes me from Hutchinson to Wilmer, so I can go to both campuses and just sit on a light rail. I thought about this. Just get super speed light rail like they have in Japan, where they go 200 miles an hour. Boom, you can get to another campus in no time. That'd be fun. I might enjoy that, but that's not financially realistic or feasible for a rural area to just tear a bunch of farmland so I can get to the other campus faster if I want to get over there, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay. Number 4 here, does your reasoning have multiple meanings? If your language is unequivocal, your speech is in the clear. But if you have testimony, that could be unclear. So the example here, merging the 4 elementary schools into one central location will eliminate operational and maintenance costs in several small towns, therefore balance the budget of the school district without increasing property taxes or lowering the educational experiences our children receive. So that has a lot of information in there, and again, a lot of lack of information too. So again, try to just make your arguments very clear. Don't try and shove too many things into one sentence. Make it a little bit clearer. So it talks about that someone may say no tax increases, but which taxes, whose taxes, what's going on? Where's this money coming from then? How are you getting a central location? Are you going to have to pay for that central location, a new building, in order to consolidate these 4 elementary schools into a central location? How about the busing? Who's going to pay for that increased costs? I mean, there's a lot of things going on here, which we don't know about. So again, a larger speech that may be clear, but it's just a lot of information there. Does your argument treat probability as a certainty? Overstating your case by presenting debatable claims as absolute facts from the beginning to end risk losing the audience's buy-in. Raising the minimum wage will definitely eliminate poverty. Definitely, 100%, all of it? I don't think so, right? There are places with higher minimum wages, and they still have poverty there as well. So again, you don't want to make those definitive claims. You may say raising the minimum wage will help reduce poverty, right? Have a little bit more flexibility there and explain how it's going to reduce poverty from your perspective. You could make that argument, but if you just make that definitive statement with, no gray area, no wiggle room, you can lose a lot of credibility right away from people who may be opposed to raising the minimum wage or worried about how the costs are going to go up or increase and how that may impact inflation or other arguments against raising the minimum wage. Number 6 here, does your cited support come from experts on your speech topic or famous people who got your attention? There's a false authority fallacy that says quoting Andrew Garfield may be enticing, but he's just an actor. He's not a source on that. Whereas the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, who oversees some, free and reduced meals, may be a more credible speaker or source for your information. So when assessing your argument, here's a checklist. Argument clearly states the claim, clearly uses support material, clearly states the inference or reasoning. Arguments use a reasoning pattern. Arguments are ethically valid, and arguments do not contain any fallacies. So a little checklist you can go through. There are tons of fallacies out there, so it might be hard just to treat that as a checklist because there could be sub-checklists there and how to make it work right. Again, there's entire classes devoted to this one chapter, so it's a lot of information packed into a small amount of time. So giving your speech, you can improve your credibility, your ethos. When you're giving your speech by citing your sources, you should, just for ethical reasons, let your audience know where you're getting your information. But with the oral citation, it's very important to tell your audience where the information came from, but also say why are they credible. So depending on your source, you should include the author's name, their expertise, if relevant, the title, the publication platform, or the date. Sometimes that's a lot of information to get in there, right? That's the kind of fancy, best way of doing it. But again, at least you're going to want the name of the source. It could be the author, it could be the if it's a website without an author, that may be the author treated as the author, and why is that source an expert on the topic? That's really important for your audience to know. The year is helpful too because it shows how current the information is. If you're citing something from 1963, it's not very current, and it may, depending on your topic, may not be as relevant. It may be super relevant if you're talking about something that happened in 1963, that was the current information at the time, but it may not be as relevant for current event happening today. Then the audience connection. So after presenting your evidence, it's time to connect with your audience. So make sure to keep your audience in mind. So know your broad audience, but don't assume things. You may know some things for sure, but other things like demographic data, but other things are behind the curtain. Psychographic. So if you're giving a speech in a classroom, you know a little bit about college students. What are community college students like? Who are the student body like at Ridgewater. You may know your classmates. You may know your teacher who's going to be a part of the audience. So you may have some broad information to work with, and keep that in mind when you're giving your speech. I remember once a student gave a speech about why you should go to college to a classroom full of college students. I'm just like, I get it. I like the topic. I think it's beneficial to go to college, but your whole audience is already in college. What are you trying to convince them from? They're already here, right? So just think that through. What your audience already brings to the table. What do they already know? And you can be explicit about that as well. Be explicit about those connections that you have to the audience. Sometimes for my online public speaking classes, I let my students pick their audience. So maybe family members, maybe friends. You know them, right? You probably know them to some extent, and maybe tutors in the library. Students have done that as well. But what do you already know about your audience, and how can you use that when framing your speech? So think about the relationships, the values that people motivate people, and other information that they have. 7.4, the conclusion. Oofda. That was a long chapter. Okay, so as you step beyond the podium, just remember, supporting evidence, make sure you're finding credible information, make sure you're not over relying on AI. AI can help you brainstorm things, but certainly there's some flaws in it. Even when you're searching on Google or trying to find information sources, it has algorithms because it knows you, right? So it has algorithms based on the wider society. Even if you went in like an incognito browser, it's still going to have some information that it lifts up and other stuff that's buried a little bit. So take your time to find some good information, some good sources, make sure they're credible, check your sources. And when you're presenting it, cite those sources, right? Make sure you're citing them in a way that builds your credibility and helps the audience understand why this is good information. And then lastly, make sure you have a balanced types of information. You're not just throwing numbers at them the entire time. You're balanced with, it could be a statistic, it could be an example, it could be a personal story that you have. But again, find balanced information. So you're using lots of different types of sources to make your points. All right, that is chapter 7 in Beyond the Podium. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this helpful. Always feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. Like I said, this is a dense chapter with a lot of information that NBN is in other ways an entire class of its own. So certainly you could learn a lot more about this, but this was just my brief overview. It was kind of a long overview, but brief overview of the topic. Thank you for watching. Take care and feel free to reach out if there's anything I can do to help.